For instance, there's a $12 billion fund to help develop these so-called sunrise sectors of deep tech and future tech. There's a lot of money as well on semiconductors. I think the government of India is showing great focus on artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and other iCET sectors. I really applaud both the US and Indian governments for their focus on the iCET sectors, and this budget proves that that focus is backed by real money.
To begin with, thank you so much for talking to ANI, Ambassador Keshap. You've just gotten back from India. The budget was announced today. Your first key takeaways from this big budget today?
Well, Reena, thank you, and greetings to you and all of your viewers. First of all, I think this is a very confident, very sober, and very pro-growth budget by the government of India. And I think it signals a real sense of optimism about the economic growth of the country. It sends a very strong signal to investors about the constancy of government policy. So I think it's very positive, and I congratulate the finance minister and her entire team and the government on what is really quite a good budget.
Right. Now, of course, we all know that this is an interim budget. The actual thing would play out only in the month of July, Talking about the technology front of this budget, what were the key takeaways there, especially when keeping iCET in mind?
So it actually dovetails really nicely with iCET, which is the initiative on critical and emerging technologies that the two governments and the U.S. Chamber launched in January of 2023. For instance, there's a $12 billion fund to help develop these so-called sunrise sectors of deep tech and future tech. And there's a lot of money as well on semiconductors. I think the government of India is showing great focus on artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and other iCET sectors. I led an aerospace and defense mission last week, or rather this week, to Delhi. And we had really good and encouraging meetings. So I really applaud both the US and Indian governments for their focus on the iCET sectors. And this budget proves that that focus is backed by real money.
Right. What is the key impression of the members at USIBC when it comes to the budget is of course just announced, but what are you really picking up from members? What's the sentiment or the mood here in the US?
Well, number one, India is viewed increasingly as a pillar of stability in a very uncertain world. If you look at macroeconomic growth, the United States and India are creating the jobs and the prosperity for the entire planet right now. And that was not always the case. So our two democracies are leading the entire world. Our companies in the United States are increasingly looking to India for their expansion and investment and their research and innovation because India is stable. And I would say that's true the other way, where Indian companies are also looking at the United States. So there's a very great recognition that not only are we part of a high trust ecosystem, but that we can actually make really good money in each other's countries because of the open system, open society, and spirit of free enterprise, plus macroeconomic and relative political stability in a very, very turbulent world.
Right. You started this, by talking about how India is like the pillar of stability at this point. What is the mood amongst, people here or investors here or corporates here when it comes to seeing the state of affairs, the state of the economy or the health of the economy back in India?
Reena, I think that people in the American investment community recognize that in the past few years, the government of India has taken substantial efforts on the macroeconomic level to improve the ease of doing business and the speed of doing business in India. If you look at the GST tax, which was an enormous innovation to create a streamlined national market, if you look at the tax bills that have been passed to enhance investor confidence, especially about retrospective taxation. If you look at the enormous inputs and efforts of the government of India related to ease of doing business, also policy entrepreneurship like the Gift City in Gujarat, people are noticing. India has taken great strides to become more user-friendly toward investors. It still has some reforms to do, and I think that this budget shows the government's focus. As those reforms happen, to facilitate business, to make it competitive with other countries, including competitive with the United States and Mexico and other big destinations for investment, I think you'll see more and more investors take a very sober and serious look at India.
Right. In this entire budget announcement, what has really stuck out for you? You talked about technology, you talked about, the state of the economy. If you had to point out one thing in this budget, what would that be?
I think the vision of 10 million rooftop solar panel electricity generators is utterly magnificent. I'm a big conservationist. I believe that human beings ought to be responsible stewards of this planet. I think that we ought to focus on things like airborne particulate emissions. And I think we ought to focus on the health and welfare of all of humanity. India's leadership on the 10 million rooftop solar panels is truly amazing. It's like the Jal Jeevan mission, which is one of the most impressive things I've seen any government perform anywhere on this planet in the last 10 years. Piped drinking water was a dream when I was a little child in India. Solar panels on rooftops is a science fiction fantasy, but making it a reality is really inspiring. I also love the fact that the union government is putting more and more money into healthcare, including this availability of emergency hospitalization funding. Also, the 800 million people who receive food subsidies through the Aadhaar card and their digital banking. These are transformations that are sweeping in the lives of average Indians, and it's creating prosperity. It's creating wealth at levels that had never seen wealth and spare money. And I think businesses and investors notice that, and they applaud that. So if of all those things, I say the solar mission. It's great, and it builds on Jal Jeevan and the improvements on electricity and roads that I have seen that are really impressive in the past few years.
Right. Now, election cycles in both these countries, two big democracies, two very important elections coming up. What can we expect in the coming days when it comes to the India-US growth story, the relationship story?
So I had a really great set of meetings in New Delhi, and I put a posting on Facebook about all the folks I met. And I met folks in both the US and Indian governments, and I had really inspiring meetings. It is clear that both governments, even as we have our big elections in both of our countries, are focused on implementation of the roadmap set out in the joint statement between your prime minister and my president on all of the ways that we're going to take the relationship forward. So the three things that the governments asked the United States Chamber to launch, iCET, IndusX, and the Innovation Handshake, are all moving forward. We all have plans to operationalize this cooperation on semiconductors, on cybersecurity, outer space, defense enterprises. The defense deals are moving forward. There's a real sense that we have to put the meat on the bones of this joint statement, and both governments are doing it, and both private sectors are doing it. We have more and more Indian leading companies joining our board because USIBC is where a lot of this work is converging. And I see a lot of movement, a lot of intent by both governments to make the most of the ground game in US-India relations in an election year, even as our systems are focused on elections. I think the serious work is happening, and I'm very happy of it because these are very turbulent times. And if you look at our strategic relationship, it is also rock solid in many ways on the Quad in the Indo-Pacific, on IMEC in the Middle East. Even though there are big problems right now, the strategic logic remains, and also I2U2. So I'm seeing convergence across the board, and we'll work out whatever problems come up. We are partners.
Right. You briefly talked about the defense deal. A lot is being said about the drone deal, as we speak. A lot has been talked about, a lot is being written about it. Where does it really stand? When can we expect this to happen?
Well, first of all, both of our governments, being democracies, are highly transparent, highly complex, highly layered, and have to obey rule of law. So in the United States, our system has, of course, the balance of powers between the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And arms sales for every country around the world go through a process. And the process starts in the executive between governments, foreign governments and the United States government. Once it clears the executive, it goes to the legislative. The legislative is allowed to opine by law on these arms deals. And then once the legislative branch chops on them, then it goes back to the executive branch and to the companies for negotiation of the details, including price, delivery, sustainment, et cetera, et cetera. So our system is our system. And, you know, what's happening with this deal is exactly the same as every other deal. There's no difference. What I find interesting is there's a lot of absolutely uninformed, erroneous gossip being spread in media organs that frankly have a track record of not checking their facts. And stories are completely at variance with the actual facts. And I have no problem with journalism. I will fight to my death for a free and independent media and freedom of expression, but people ought to do the bare minimum of fact checking before they go out and publish what is essentially erroneous gossip.